In December 1938, two chemists in Berlin split the atom. Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann had just discovered nuclear fission on German soil, months before the war even began. For a moment, Germany held the head start. The nation that gave the world Einstein, Planck, and Heisenberg should have been the first to build the bomb. It never came close. What stopped Hitler's scientists wasn't a single failure. It was 5 separate breakdowns, each one shrinking what was already a narrow window, until the project that should have terrified the Allies became a footnote next to it. The first breakdown happened before the war even started, and Germany did it to itself. Hitler's regime didn't lose the race for the bomb on a battlefield. It lost it at the passport office. Jewish scientists, many of them the very people who understood the physics best, were stripped of their positions and driven out under the racial laws of the 1930s. Albert Einstein left. Liz Meitner, the physicist who first explained what fission actually meant, fled to Sweden in 1938 with 60 marks in her purse. Leo Szilard, James Franck, dozens of others scattered to Britain and America. By the time Germany needed a nuclear program, it had already exiled a large share of the minds capable of building one. The trouble began quietly, in a laboratory, with a single number that came out wrong. To build a reactor, physicists needed a moderator, something to slow neutrons down without swallowing them whole. Graphite was the obvious answer. It was what the Americans would use. But in 1941, physicist Walther both ran the measurements on graphite's neutron absorption, and his sample, tainted with a trace of boron no one caught, gave him the wrong answer. Graphite, the data said, wouldn't work. So the Germans turned instead to heavy water. Rarer, harder to make, harder to move. One flawed reading in one lab had just steered an entire national program onto the narrowest road available, and there was no going back. That road led straight to a mountainside in Norway. Nearly all the world's heavy water came from one plant, Vemork, wedged into the cliffs above a fjord, and the Allies knew exactly what it meant. Norwegian commandos, trained and dropped in by British intelligence, went after it again and again. They came through the snow in the dead of winter and blew the electrolysis cells apart. Bombers came from the air when the plant was rebuilt. And when the Germans finally tried to slip the last of their heavy water stockpile out by ferry in 1944, resistance fighters sent it to the bottom of a lake instead. Each raid bought only a delay. Together, they bought the Allies something far more valuable, time the German program never got back. Even so, the deepest obstacle was never a shortage of brilliance, or even of raw material. It was a matter of belief. In June 1942, Heisenberg sat across from Albert Speer, the man running Germany's war industry, and told him plainly what a bomb would cost and how long it would take. It could be done, he said, but not soon. Not soon enough to matter. Speer listened, weighed it against a military that needed weapons now, not in a hypothetical future, and made his decision. Money kept flowing to the reactor, to research, to the slow accumulation of knowledge, but never to the kind of industrial gamble America was already staking its fortune on in the hills of Tennessee. Germany looked at Oak Ridge and Hanford and never even tried to build their equal. By then the war itself had become the enemy of the project. Allied bombers were dismantling German industry city by city, and what little uranium, electricity, and skilled labor remained was being pulled toward tanks, fighter planes, and rockets instead. The team that once counted among the finest physicists in the world was reduced to a handful of men, dragging an experimental reactor from town to town, always one step ahead of the advancing front. By the spring of 1945, Allied intelligence teams were racing through a collapsing Germany looking for exactly this. They found Heisenberg's group in a cave beneath a castle in the small town of Hagelosh, still tending a reactor that had never come close to sustaining itself. The scientists were rounded up and flown to a quiet English country house called Farm Hall, where hidden microphones recorded their every word. It was there, listening to a radio broadcast, that they learned Hiroshima was gone, destroyed by the very weapon they had spent years failing to build. The recordings caught the silence that followed, then the slow, dawning shame of understanding that someone else had done what they could not. None of it came down to a lack of genius. Heisenberg, Hahn, Weizsäcker, these were among the sharpest minds of their generation. What Germany lacked was everything genius needs to succeed. The people it had already driven away, the accurate numbers it never had, supply lines it couldn't hold, and a government willing to bet everything on a weapon that might arrive too late to matter. Piece by piece, the path narrowed, until the nation that had discovered fission first found itself, in the end, the furthest behind.